Welcome to my podcast, The Government Mechanic. I am your host, Dr. Lynn Sandra Kahn, and I am the Government Mechanic. This is episode 11, and we're going to talk about peace building, peacemaking, and diplomacy. In fact, we're going to do that for episodes 11 and 12. Now, you might wonder, how is it that a podcast and YouTube channel called The Government Mechanic arrives at conversations about peace building, peacemaking, and diplomacy? The answer is that once you start fixing broken government departments and agencies, once the leaders in those departments get out of the office, get out of their comfort zone, and go out into communities and talk to real people about real solutions, the activities of problem solving morph into the dynamics of community peace building. And that's how I've made the connection. So I'm going to start by defining some terms, and then I'm going to introduce 3 video clips of an interview I did with Ambassador John McDonald about 15 years ago, but he still is as brilliant as he was. So, peace building, peacemaking, and diplomacy. Peace building is active. It's a ceasefire. It's a gang truce. It's a summit on violence. Peace building is active. Peacemaking is internal. It's psychological. It's a change of heart or an insight where suddenly you see the other's point of view. Diplomacy is higher level conflict resolution across countries, cultures, groups in conflict. And what the State Department has acknowledged, and a lot of it is thanks to the work of Ambassador John McDonald, is that diplomacy is not just government to government. Diplomacy takes place on many different tracks, people to people. So let's introduce our first video, Ambassador John McDonald talking about peace building and multi-track diplomacy.
Ambassador John McDonald, thank you for this interview. For 40 years, you worked as a diplomat at the U.S. Department of State, negotiating, mediating, and doing the work you call Track 1 diplomacy, government to government. You worked in Berlin, Frankfurt, Bonn, Paris, Ankara, Tehran, Karachi, Cairo, and Washington, D.C. You were appointed ambassador twice by President Jimmy Carter and twice by President Ronald Reagan to represent the United States at various UN World Conferences. In the 1980s, you began writing about Track 2 diplomacy, people to people, non-governmental. By the time you retired from the Foreign Service in 1987, you had 5 tracks of diplomacy. In late 1988, you became president of the Iowa Peace Institute, and in 1992, back here in Washington, D.C., you started the Institute for Multi-Track Diplomacy. You've been at it for 15 years. You've written 8 books and many, many articles. There are now 9 tracks of diplomacy, and your institute has projects in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Ambassador McDonald, tell us more about peace building and multi-track diplomacy.
How much time do I have?
Take as long as you're willing to give.
I can talk for hours about that question. Well, the concept of Track 1 and Track 2 is rather interesting because for all those years I was focused on Track 1, which is government to government, which is not very risk-taking, not very imaginative, always under instructions. And so you had a fairly straight line that you had to follow. In 1985, I wrote the first book on Track 2 diplomacy. It's non-government to non-government. It's people to people. It's small group to small group. And it is risk-taking. It is innovative. It's challenging. It does things that governments are afraid to do, don't want to do, or don't want to support. All in the field of peace building and peacemaking. So our 9-track approach, our multi-track diplomacy, is what I call a systems approach to peace. It means that all of these tracks, which I'll talk about in a moment, have to work together. And that no one track, including government, can ever by itself solve a peace problem or create a peace that will last. That's the fundamental premise of what I'm about. You need collaboration among peoples to bring about a peace that will actually last. So Track 3 is the role of business, a major factor. When they have the money, they have the skills, they have the vision, they can bring about change, but they're a hard group to sell. Track 4 is individual people exchanges, people coming from one culture to this culture, for example, learning new skills and going back and carrying out those skills in their own country. Track 5 is what we do as a small institute, a small non-governmental organization, not for profit, here in Rosslyn, Virginia. It's education, training, a little research. Track 6 is peace activism. It's people power. It's the power of people collectively to change systems nonviolently. Track 7 is religion. Wherever we go, we work with people of different religions. Track 8 is money. I should tell you, we're always broke. That's the way the field works. It's hard to raise money for peace these days in the United States. We don't charge for our services overseas, so we have to raise money to go overseas and do the work that we do. And all of our work basically is internationally overseas. Track 9 is the center circle in our logo, which is communication, and what we're doing right now. That's the heart of this whole concept, is communication, the ability of people to talk to each other. And that's a skill that many people still do not have to this day. One of my fundamental beliefs is that you have to, if you want to solve a conflict at any level of society, with your spouse and your kids, family, the city council, nationally, internationally, the first step is to sit down face to face, like we're doing, and talk about it. If you can't do that, you'll never solve the problem. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, I hope you can see in this video that when you start looking under the hood of broken government agencies and have those conversations to fix those agencies and meet with and talk with community members, then the concepts of peace building and peacemaking and diplomacy come to the fore. They are important in fixing broken agencies and having the kind of conversations in our communities that we need to have to reduce the anger and reduce conflict. In the second video, the ambassador tells a story about what happens in the training that he provides. Play the clip.
Ambassador, can you say a little more about what was in the training with the 2,500 Cypriots? What are you training people to do?
Well, we train them in listening skills. We train them in how to put themselves in the shoes of the other person. I'll tell you one little story that appealed to me, the power of this. We always sit in a circle. We sit in a circle for 4 reasons. First is that it's practical. Everybody can see everybody else and hear everybody else. The second reason, it's a symbol of peace building in every civilization known to man, if you go back far enough in their history. The elders will sit around in a circle, sometimes a fire in the middle, sometimes there's not. But it's been a symbol of peace building for thousands of years. Third reason is that it allows the energy to flow across the circle without impediments, with chairs and desks and that sort of thing. Energy is important to me because you can begin to sense what the people on the other side of that circle are thinking about. And the last reason is it's a symbol of our institute, the circle, which I described a few moments ago. So we let it be known that we were going to be holding a training in the Turkish Muslim North. But we don't advertise. We don't put up signs. We don't go on the radio or television and say we're meeting at this particular place. We work by word of mouth. Word of mouth is the way you build trust. If you and I get together and you trust me, the next time we meet, you can bring a friend. It's a slow process, but it's a process that lasts. When people come together, they stay together. So there were 35 people in this circle. 40% were women, which is great because for me, it's the women who are the peace builders in the world, and you can appreciate that. It's the women who are the peace builders. They always get it before the men do. So I was delighted to have 40% of the Muslim population in this 35-person circle to be women. So we went around the circle, and each person, I just wanted to know their first name and why they'd come together. We don't probe, we just take people at their own face value. Halfway across the circle where you're sitting from me, a man spoke up when we got to him, and he said, "I'm a medical doctor." He said, "I've hated the Greek Cypriots all my life because they killed both my parents." And he said, "But I want to tell you a story about what happened to me. Because when I went on with my education, after my parents died, I became a medical doctor, got married. I have a 10-year-old son. And the other evening, I went to kiss him goodnight and found lying in bed next to him was a long toy wooden rifle that he'd taken to bed with him. I said to my 10-year-old, "Why do you have that wooden rifle in bed with you?" And the boy said, "To kill the Greek Cypriots when they come after me." And the doctor said, "I learned a powerful lesson then, and I'm here to say I forgive the Greek Cypriots who killed my parents. I want to learn new skills to pass on to my son." It's the kind of impact.
Okay, in the third video clip, we're going to go deeper into what happens in these groups and look at those moments when insights happen, opinions change, there's a change of heart or a change of perception. Play the third clip.
If you were to step back and look at the group dynamics of these peace-seeking dialogues, can you identify those transformational moments when changes in attitude or breaking through psychological tension somehow propels groups to a broader view?
Well, let me give you a third example, which will answer your questions. And that's our work in Liberia. Liberia, country in West Africa, founded 150 years ago by freed American slaves that dominated the country and the indigenous people for all those decades. In 1980, a man named Sergeant Doe, military, pulled off a coup. He killed the whole cabinet, and the president took over, and he ran the country for 10 years. And then he was in turn assassinated and killed in another coup, and the whole country fell into total chaos. Down to the tribal level, everybody killing everybody else. It was horrible. The Carter Center in 1992 set up a center in Monrovia, the capital, and they invited us a year or two later to help them in the area of conflict resolution and the training. And so we went there and we eventually identified 9 people that we wanted to work with. There were 9 of those 9, 7 were men, 2 were women, 7 Christian, 2 Muslims. They were about at the number 3 level, the warlords, the deputy warlord, and then number 3. There was no safe space in Liberia, no safe haven. And so we took everybody to Ghana, a country nearby. And we went to a lovely place up in the north called Akasambo. And we had 10 days together with those 9 people. We were a 4-person team. It's a very interesting group. One of them was even a colonel in the military. And we sat in that circle when the colonel asked if he could give a prayer to get started. I was delighted, and he did in English. The very next day, one of the 2 Muslims said, "Could we do a prayer in Arabic?" And we said, "Of course," and they did. But that sort of set the tone. But those 9 people gathered together, and we took a half a day for each of them to tell their story. Now, of course, wherever we go, there's fear. Everybody is afraid of everybody else. And that was certainly true in this circle. They were all afraid of each other, and that actually became a bond over time. But each one of them felt that they were the most traumatized person in the country. But by the time they heard the other stories, they realized that all of them were equally traumatized by the conflict. And that too became a bond. And they had these joint terrible experiences that they had shared together over time. And while we did the trainings that we were talking about, and they began to interrelate with each other, The next to the last day, I proposed a new idea. I said, I'd like you as a group to project 25 years into the future. 25 years. What would you like your country to look like in 25 years? Well, that's difficult for anybody to do, but particularly if you worry about whether you're going to survive in a week or two after you get back to your country. But I said, I'm not going to put anything writing on the walls or on the blackboards. I just want to listen to you as you talk about your vision for the future. And I will write down what I hear, and I'll summarize it, and I'll give it back to you tomorrow morning. We spent the whole day on that very simple exercise, and they got really into it, really involved, and each one of those 9 people participated. And I took notes, and that night I wrote it up. The next morning I gave it back to them. They didn't change a sentence or a paragraph or a word. It's only half a page. They all had a common vision. All these tribes that have been killing each other for whatever reason had a common vision of the future of their country. They wanted democracy. They wanted peace. They wanted education. They wanted jobs. They wanted freedom of the press, freedom of religion, all the things that we believe in this country. They had this common vision, which was so simply stated that that's what they all agreed to. So I said, this was fantastic. This was great. Now I wanted them to come back to today's world, and could they agree on one step toward that goal by the end of the day, the last day we were together? They thought they could. So they worked together. And then finally they came back and announced with pride they had agreed on 2 steps. The first step was to go back to Monrovia and create their own non-governmental organization on peace and conflict resolution. All 9 of them working together for peace, which was great. The second step, I said, we have identified 21 leaders in our conflict, the warlords, the UN, ECOMOG, ECOWAS, the key embassies, 21 different people. And we've agreed that all 9 of us together will meet over the next month, 9 to 1 in each of those 21 different meetings. We want these people, these leaders, to see physically that we can all work together to build peace. And that's what they did.
Well, this has been episode 11. We've talked about peace building, peacemaking, and multi-track diplomacy, and listened to an old interview with Ambassador John McDonald. Next, on episode 12, I will talk about the group dynamics of peacemaking and an old theory of peacemaking. See you then.